Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from FS Club. The title today is Privacy by Design is Essential to Complementing Regulatory Compliance. Privacy laws are no longer sufficient. And we are absolutely delighted, not least because we had a few last-minute technical glitches, so apologies for starting a few moments late. But we have Dr. Ann Cavoukian here, the Executive Director of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. And it really is a delight to have Ann here today for a whole variety of reasons, which she probably doesn't know, but a lot of them personal, a lot of them admiration of her work over the years, stressing that really the key thing here is you've got to build privacy into the design from the beginning. It isn't just an add-on, but I'll let her go to that. So if we could, I'd just like to say a few words in preparation. Firstly, you'll know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Yen. And I'm only able to do all of these webinars with you because our sponsors of the FS Club allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And today we're going to be touching on all three of those because privacy features very much in technology, but it also features very much in economics. And without privacy, frankly, all of modern finance would come tumbling down like a house of cards. So we've got a rich topic area. My job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible so you can hear from our expert, but if I might, three quick things. Firstly, yes, this is being recorded and the recording will go up in approximately 2 working days. So that's afternoon here. And for those of you in Canada, it'll be morning there on Wednesday, we hope. We are also, of course, posting the slides. In fact, I believe they're already up. And finally, how do you participate? What we love is having you here to engage with us. So after 20 minutes or so from Ann, we're going to have a Q&A, and the way to do that is to type into the GoToWebinar Q&A facility. This allows a few things. Firstly, I am here with you, so I am not on Signal, WhatsApp, or your various communications mechanism of choice. Please use the GoToWebinar facility. But secondly, all of your comments, questions, observations will get sent to Ann with your email attached. So if there's little points of detail you'd like or whatever, we can follow up on that as well. And we will make sure that she does get a copy of all those comments, questions, and observations. Now, many years ago being approximately 1977, I spent quite a bit of time at Harvard running one of the early nodes on the internet. And one of the things that we kept remarking was that all the things that we hadn't thought about, and amongst them, people often forget, passwords were not designed for privacy. Passwords were designed originally just to keep one programmer from overwriting another's on a time-sharing terminal. We never thought people would be transmitting money in anything other than some kind of sci-fi world, certainly not as rapidly as that began. We never thought of all the evil things that were out there. We really saw the internet as a serendipitous thing. I always remember our paradigm was we would be able to talk to an Indian farmer's wife. Why he wanted to allow us to talk to his wife, I've never understood, but that's what we thought. The world would be a better place if we could chat with anybody in the world. And it's turned out, in some ways, the world is a better place, but it's also turned out in some ways the world is a bit of a worse place. And probably two of the biggest things that were never designed in, one was the internet really of record. How do I know what's actually been sent? And that's a lot of the blockchain discussions and talk are really just picking up on that. But privacy still remains that really unregarded, unloved orphan child that none of us really wanted to pick up and tackle. And Ann has some very deep thoughts on that. So Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very much appreciated. And if you could kindly advance the slides for me, that would be great. So let's go to our next slide, please. And I always like to start by dispelling the myths because there are so many myths associated with what privacy is and is not. In the next slide, please. This is the one that drives me crazy. People think privacy equals secrecy. It does not equal secrecy. It's not about having something to hide. My God, that just drives me crazy. In the next slide, what privacy is really about is about control. In the next slide, please, it's about personal control relating to the uses of your personal information. User control is critical because you see, only you know the context associated with the data. Is it sensitive? Is it not? I always tell people, if you want to give away your personal information, be my guest as long as you make the decision to do so, because only you know the context associated with it. Freedom of choice is critical. The Germans have a wonderful term for this they created many years ago, informational self-determination. that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And it's no surprise that Germany is the leading privacy data protection country in the world. It's no surprise they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich. And when that ended, they said, never again will we allow the state to control our personal information, to strip us of our privacy. And they've stood by that. I love it. In the next slide, please, you'll also see that privacy is absolutely critical to freedom. It forms the foundation of our freedom. It's a necessary condition for societal prosperity, for well-being, for innovation, creativity. You need privacy. It's essential. Without privacy, individual human rights, property rights, civil liberties, these would be out the window. And these are the conceptual engines of innovation and creativity. You can't have this in any kind of meaningful manner. I always like to give the example of Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. He would take it back to the dealership and buy another one. And this continued until his death. And you might think, why did he keep doing that? Because in California at that time, you had up to 6 months before you had to get a license plate put on your car. And he didn't want his license plate number. He didn't want to be tracked or surveilled or anything. So I always think, I love that story. Surveillance is the exact opposite of privacy. It's the antithesis of privacy. It's one of the negative consequences of surveillance is that it limits, it usurps your cognitive bandwidth. You go inward. I'm a psychologist. That's how I talk. When you think people are watching or looking at you, you're peering over your shoulder, you're going inward. You need to do the exact opposite for innovation and creativity. You need wild blue sky thinking where you don't care what stupid things you might say because no one's listening, and then you come up with the brilliant ideas. Privacy is essential for that. In the next slide, please, I'm going to tell you a little bit about privacy by design, which I created in the first term, first couple of days of my first term as privacy commissioner here of Ontario, Canada. I was privacy commissioner for 3 terms and I loved it. But when I first started, I noticed that, not surprisingly, all the brilliant lawyers in my office thought the only way to protect privacy was to apply the privacy laws after a data breach or privacy infraction took place. And that's extremely important, there's no question. But I wanted to add something. I wanted a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention up front. So I created privacy by design, literally at my kitchen table at home over 3 nights, and brought it into the office and sold it to my lawyers, which they eventually embraced. And it doesn't take the place of regulatory compliance once the data breaches, et cetera, happen. But the point was, let's try to prevent the harms from arising. Let's bake it into the code online, bake it into all of our operations so people can't forget to do privacy. It forms an essential component of your operations. In the next slide, please. Privacy commissioners have a conference once a year, usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day conference, we have a half day just for privacy commissioners to introduce resolutions, et cetera, that the entire assembly of privacy and data protection commissioners vote on. And that year, I introduced the idea that privacy by design should be adopted as an international standard that we could all follow for all the reasons that I outlined a minute ago, because we wanted to prevent the harms from arising, ideally. And to my surprise, all the commissioners voted in favor of this unanimously. And the reason I was surprised is because commissioners are brilliant lawyers who love to drill down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A and apply that to the fact situation, which is very, very important. But what I was proposing was completely different. So after the voting, I went around thanking all the commissioners and I expressed my surprise. And they said, Ann, in this day and age, we have to have something like privacy by design, because in the next slide, please, they said, through privacy laws and regulatory compliance, we're only reaching the tip of the iceberg these days. With all the phishing attacks and all the online hacking and social media abounding, the majority of harms aren't coming to our attention. So we need a model of prevention, ideally, to reach the base of the iceberg. Most of the privacy breaches are just remaining unknown, unchallenged, unregulated, and that was unacceptable to the commissioners. And so they said regulatory compliance alone after the fact is no longer sustainable as the sole model for ensuring the future of privacy. And we've had such great luck with this. And the next slide, please. You'll see that privacy by design has been translated into over 40 languages. And this is so exciting. And I should add that Brazil has just introduced a new privacy law a few months ago, and privacy by design is included in that as well. Now, there are two essentials to privacy by design. I've talked about the first one, prevent the harms from rising. You have to be proactive. But equally important is banish zero-sum models. I hate zero-sum. Let me tell you why. Zero-sum means you can only have one interest versus another. Win, lose, either or. Privacy versus security. Privacy versus data utility. No, I don't want that, because it was never privacy that won over the other interest, nor should it be. But I sure as hell wasn't going to have it lose out all the time to the other interests. So getting rid of this dated either or model is so important. In the next slide, please. It's as simple and as difficult as changing positive sum means you can have two positive gains at the same time, which create a win-win. It's not either or, it's you're going to have both. So I remember talking to Bruce Schneier, a leading brilliant cryptographer, and he said, Ann, this zero sum involves unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. And it's as simple and as difficult as replacing the verses with and. Let's do privacy and security, privacy and data utility. Believe it or not, privacy and marketing. The Canadian Marketing Association often invites me to give a keynote at their annual conference. And I go, and I always start by saying, I'm sure I'm the least popular speaker here today. And fortunately, they laugh and say, yeah, we know we have to hear from what you have to say. But I say, look, privacy is not anti-marketing. It's pro-choice. You have to give people a voice as to what they want. In the next slide, please, I'll go through very quickly. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design, and I've gone through the first one. You have to be preventative instead of remedial. Let me spend a moment on privacy as the default setting. This is huge. This is a game changer, because what it says to your customers, to citizens, is you don't have to search through all the legalese and the terms of service and the pages and pages of the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my personal information for any purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection, which I've consented to. We know people don't do that anymore. Life is short. That takes hours. But it's not because people don't care about privacy. Concern for privacy is at an all-time high. In the last 2 years, all of the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, etc., have put concern for privacy at the 90 percentile. 90% very concerned about their privacy. 92% concerned about loss of control over their personal information. Privacy as the default setting changes all of that. What it says to people is, you don't have to ask for privacy. We give it to you automatically. It's the default setting. It's embedded into all of our operations, into our code. We can only use your personal information for the primary purpose that you consented to. Beyond that, we can't use it for any other purpose. And if a secondary use arises down the road that we'd like to use your personal information for, we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent on that. This is a game changer. Companies that have been certified for privacy by design have come back to me and told me this has changed everything. It builds trusted business relationships like no other, and there's such a trust deficit right now. So this is a huge win. Embedded in design speaks for itself. You can't forget about it. It's always there. I've talked about full functionality. Get rid of zero sum, either or. Substitute and both. End-to-end security. Let me talk about this for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than just security alone, if you don't have, in this day and age of constant phishing and hacking, if you don't have a solid foundation from end to end with full life cycle protection in terms of security, you're not going to have any privacy. So start always by ensuring a solid foundation in security. visibility and transparency. I always tell people, both private sector and public sector, you may have custody and control of someone's personal information, but it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the data subject. So please give them a right of access to the information. And companies have told me they love this because what they've learned is, they say, look, we've got personal information on thousands of customers. We don't know what's accurate and what's not anymore, but once you open it up to individuals to access their own information, they tell us, no, that piece of information, that was 2 years ago. Here's the current information. So it enhances the accuracy of your information holdings and increases the quality of what you have. It's a total win-win. And respect for user privacy, we could have started there, because once you have it focused on the user and it's user-centric, all of this flows. Now, you may say, okay, maybe that sounds good, but can people really do this? It sounds too hard. Au contraire. In the next slide, please. This is take a look at this paper. It actually consists of a compilation of 22 papers that we wrote with all of the major companies, tech companies. Think of any big company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM. I'm sure I'm forgetting many others. And we wrote it on all these subject areas, the smart grid, surveillance cameras, biometrics, NFC, big data, data analytics, surveillance. We wrote it on all of these to show how you can implement privacy by design in all of these areas. So please take a look at it. And in the next slide, please. In the last, near the end of my last term, I got a letter from JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center. And I loved it because they said, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. And the reason I love this is because I thought if the Japanese, whose first language is not English, can understand the importance of positive sum over zero sum, then surely the rest of us can figure this out. So please think about this. Now you might say, okay, but what's it going to cost me? It's really expensive, right? Wrong. In the next slide, please. Of course, doing it proactively with privacy by design, there's a small cost involved, but it's a fraction of the cost you will incur if you don't do it, and you will have a data breach or privacy infraction. These days, they're not just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits that are invoked, costing millions of dollars. But the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. The loss of consumer confidence and trust just puts companies out of business. So get smart, get proactive, and save a lot of money and attract a lot of business. Now, let me switch in the next slide to Europe. In the EU, they introduced the General Data Protection Regulation. It came into effect in 2018. And this is huge. It strengthens control over one's personal data, and it just provides much stronger privacy and data protection. And in the next slide, please, what I loved about it, in addition to everything else, is they included my privacy by design as data protection by design and privacy as the default setting, remember the second foundational principle, into the GDPR directly. This is huge, right? I mean, I'm just so excited about this because it really strengthens privacy by design all around the world, because all countries want to have essential equivalence with the GDPR, with the EU, so that they can engage in trade and business without any repercussions. In the next slide, please. Information Age wrote that it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. Let me assure you, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think the sentiment that is being reflected here is that if you do privacy by design, you will automatically be satisfying many of the other requirements of the GDPR. In the next slide, please. So, Privacy Commissioner of Canada went to our federal government and said, look, we need to upgrade our private sector legislation because we're no longer essentially equivalent to the GDPR. And they've added privacy by design into the GDPR, and that was created by Canadian Ann Cavoukian, so we have to do this here. So we were optimistic. In the next slide, please. Oh, the federal government responded to this by introducing a paper called Towards Privacy by Design, basically how to upgrade our federal private sector legislation. Now, this was in 2018. Do you think they've done that? Shall we guess? No, they haven't. This is the problem with governments. Anyway, let's move on. We can't have that hold us back. So what I've done, I've introduced Privacy by Design certification, where companies can come to me if they say they're doing privacy by design, and with their consent, I partner with KPMG. KPMG goes in to the company, looks under the hood, so to speak, and makes sure that they're doing privacy by design properly. And if they are, I certify them, and they love it because they shout it from the rooftops, they put it on their website, and it just acts as a game changer for them. It introduces so many benefits and enhances their business. In the next slide, please. I also teach a course on privacy by design, global privacy framework, an online course, and people all over the world follow this, so I'm very excited. Let me conclude in the next slide, please, by just reminding you that privacy and security risks are best managed by proactively embedding the privacy by design principles in order to prevent the privacy harms from arising, avoid the data breaches, etc. And when you focus on prevention, it's much easier and much more cost effective to build in privacy and security upfront, privacy and data utility, rather than after the fact. It also reflects the most ethical treatment of personal data. And as you know, there's so much focus on ethics these days, it's everywhere. So if you do this, you'll be showing a much more ethical framework. And please abandon zero-sum either-or thinking, win-lose. That was so yesterday. Embrace doubly enabling systems, privacy and security, privacy and data utility. You can do this. And a colleague of mine in Germany, Kai Rannenberg, he used to say to me, well, if people are smart, they'll lead with privacy by design. But a lot of people might just get privacy by chance. But far worse, they'll get privacy by disaster, and the regulator will come knocking on the door. That's the last thing you want. So please, get rid of this, follow privacy by design, and give yourself a competitive advantage over the others. In the next slide, this is just my contact information. If you want to email me about anything, please feel free to do so. I'll respond. And also, I tweet every morning the latest stories of the day between 5 and 6 a.m. because a lot of them come from Europe, and I tweet them out. So if you're interested in what's going on in privacy, you can follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much.
Well, fantastic, and thank you, Ann. And folks, please do send in any comments, questions, or observations. But just to get going, Anna, could you give us an example of a company that really got it right, that impressed you? You don't have to name names, but just what
no,
really.
I can't. There's a company that called Bearing Media, and they did a lot of media, and they put out information in terms of just information that might be of interest to clients, etc. But they did it in the following manner. They said to people, go to this site if you want to follow up on this information, but we will not reveal any of your personal identifiers to anyone. We will not reveal to the companies who we do work with, and they engaged in marketing efforts. And they said, yes, we engage with marketers and we will give their information to you so you can benefit from them. But if you identify yourself and let us know how to contact you, we will not share that information with any third parties. We follow privacy by design completely. They had such incredible success as a marketing company, and they were relatively small at the beginning, and they were bought out by a much larger company called Audience Partners, because Audience Partners, major marketing company, liked the approach, the positive sum approach to marketing, that all of a sudden marketing wasn't viewed in a negative light. It was viewed in a very positive light that protected privacy. Win-win, privacy and marketing.
Okay. And in terms of this audit process that you have, I mean, I happen to sit on the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, sort of the regulator of standards here in the UK, and I've seen standards start in a variety of ways. So it's not a bad idea maybe to get going with PwC or what have you. But do you have plans to try and turn that into effectively an ISO standard?
Well, that's so interesting, because ISO has actually been looking at privacy by design for the last 3-4 years, and we're just advancing to a stage where, touch wood, I don't want to say it is going to become an ISO standard, but it's looking very, very positive that Privacy by Design will become an ISO standard, hopefully in the following year. So that would be extremely helpful to everyone, of course, for the obvious reasons. So I'm very pleased about that.
Okay. Now I've got a couple of questions here. Jeremy Light is curious, how important or effective is monitoring against surveillance in Privacy by Design? And he holds out the LinkedIn feature notifying who has viewed your profile is an interesting example.
I'm obviously not a fan of surveillance in any capacity whatsoever. I oppose surveillance very strongly. But what I don't oppose is if you present things to people and give them the opportunity to opt in, to choose to make use of the services, like LinkedIn, for example, if you choose to join, then it's done with full knowledge and consent of the data subjects, the individuals involved, and then you turn it into a win-win. Again, there's nothing wrong with connecting people as long as you have the consent of both parties to do so.
Okay. We're just going to go back to standards for a bit. A couple of questions have popped up. Olivia Bosch, ISO 27701 deals with security aspects of privacy. How does that differ from what you are proposing?
Oh, security aspects of privacy are very important. There's no question. As I mentioned when I was going through the 7 foundational principles, if you don't have strong security from start end to end, you're not going to have any privacy. But it is very different from privacy by design because the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It rests on people choosing to partake in various activities and have their information shared in a consensual manner, in a limited way. So privacy to me is a much broader concept than just security alone.
Okay. Hugh Purser is curious, is there a public database showing which companies have been certified by PbD?
You can go to my database, and we have the companies indicated there, Global Privacy and Security by Design.com. And Global Privacy and Security by Design Center.com. And there you can see the companies and how you can get onto this.
Fantastic. Jane Saracen-Kahn, given the 50 states in the United States have governors with various stances on privacy, what's your read on how privacy by design will shake out in the US over the next year or two beyond California's CCPA?
Yeah, I was just going to say California. Let's look to California. Huge.
And Jane is especially concerned about healthcare data. So she'd love your brilliant lens on this.
Unfortunately, I'm not optimistic about healthcare data in the United States, and I don't mean to be negative, but so you mentioned California, very, very strong, great law there. Very few other states are comparable to that. But I should mention one thing where the states are far in advance of Canada, for example, and that's in the area of facial recognition. There are a number of states that have actually banned facial recognition completely. And I applaud that because with facial recognition, the one-to-many model, the majority of the facial recognition matches are inaccurate. False positives abound. In the UK, for example, 81% through facial recognition, 81% of the matches are false positives. Can you imagine? 81%. That's appalling. So in the US, a number of states, like over a dozen, have actually banned facial recognition. So I applaud them for that. Health information, it's much murkier. In Canada, we have very strong privacy laws against health information, protecting health information. We have PHIPAA in Ontario, my jurisdiction, the Personal Health Information Protection Act, which very, very strongly protects information. So I think this is certainly in the States, it's a work in progress.
Okay. Now, got an interesting explanatory thing. Stephen Murgatroyd wonders if you could comment on the distinction between privacy and anonymity, especially in social media.
Privacy is all about protecting your personal data in a consensual manner according to the wishes of the individual. So if an individual chooses to share their personal information, so it's no longer anonymous with either a government entity or a private sector entity, that is their choice. That has to be their choice, and that has to be permitted. Anonymity is extremely valuable in places, especially where that kind of choice is not possible. Let me give you an example. Smart cities. I'm on the International Council for Smart Cities, and I work on that here in Toronto in my jurisdiction in Canada. I was working with Sidewalk Labs a while back, an alphabet company, and when they came here, they asked me, they retained me to embed privacy by design into the smart city they envisioned building in Toronto, Canada. And I jumped at that because I live in Toronto. I want a very strong smart city of privacy here in my jurisdiction. So I started looking at this. And then what I realized was, because all of the technology is going to be on 24/7, the sensors, the cameras, etc., individuals aren't going to have a choice. They're not going to have the opportunity to say yes or no, to consent or not to the collection of their personal data. So what I said to them was, you have to de-identify data, anonymize it at source, meaning the minute the sensor picks up the data or the camera or anything, you strip it of all personal identifiers immediately, anonymizing the data, thereby enabling its use because you've removed the privacy risks from it. And they went along with that. And then later they didn't, and I left them, and then they're no longer here. So the point I'm trying to make is anonymity in certain cases, very valuable, where people don't have an opportunity to consent or revoke consent or any of that, participate. But there are times when people want to make a choice and want to vote in favor of a particular service or product. And so that's what we have to remember, because if it's fully anonymized, people aren't given that opportunity.
Okay. Jeremy Wilson is curious. Says, privacy by design sounds like a basic human right of the digital era. Are there any notable jurisdictions wrestling with this? And may I add to that, what happens if we get this wrong? So what? We don't implement it. Paint us the bad picture.
As I mentioned, many jurisdictions have adopted privacy by design. In the EU, the GDPR, which is huge. In Japan, Brazil, a number of countries that are now introducing privacy by design in their laws. So that's wonderful. What happens if we don't have a big deal? The big deal is that surveillance is mounting dramatically. And this will increase exponentially if we don't take strong measures right now to curtail its expansion. I fear surveillance because it curtails our liberties, our freedom. And we can't live in a society where there's constant surveillance and limited freedom. That's what I object to enormously. So I'm hoping that with the growth of privacy by design and people looking at opportunities, that you can have privacy by design and data utility and various opportunities. You can have both. Again, that positive sum mindset of win-win instead of win-lose. That's what I'm hoping for. So that's my wish. And surveillance is the negative, which we have to minimize at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite struck by the breadth of what you're trying to cover in a positive way. I hate that, but it's GPS, it's geolocation, it's cameras. Oh, and it's computing. And yet a lot of this does find its way, frankly, into computing anyhow. It's all digitally stored, that gives it the power that cuts in so many ways. So got to sort of, Matt Ward is curious, what do you think the effect of confidential computing will be on helping to enable privacy by design? This tends to be a bit of a cloud initiative, but it could be quite important, couldn't it?
Could be very important. So many companies are now moving information to the cloud. The move to decentralization is growing as well on the part of major companies. And that's huge, because once your information is no longer retained in a centralized manner where unauthorized third parties could gain access to it, it's far more protected, much more strongly protected, if you have it in the cloud in a decentralized manner. There's a whole decentralized identity foundation now, consisting of all the major companies, Microsoft, Intel, etc., IBM. And so that gives me great hope that we can, in fact, move in this direction of far greater, stronger protections in a decentralized manner where it's retained in a confidential way. So I totally agree with you, Michael.
Okay, good. Now, Peter Hanley is kind of curious. is prevention and avoidance as one of the principles going to be sufficient in future? Do you have any other principles under development?
If I could get prevention, I would be thrilled. So I'm sure we can grow privacy by design to expand it to other preventions. In fact, if he has any ideas, please let me know because I would love that. Right now, I'm focusing on prevention and allowing an opportunity to have data utility in a way that enables companies to benefit from data without harming the individual's personal privacy. It's that win-win model that I'm trying to advance.
Okay. Now, Stephen Murgatroyd was, looking at, how do you get compliance by firms whose business model is the antithesis of privacy? When Max Schrems in Austria can't seem to, he says, how can Google and Facebook be persuaded when their business model is really based on taking your data on an all or nothing consent?
Well, but look at all the pushback that Facebook is getting right now in a huge way. And believe it or not, tell your people to go look for this. If you're on Facebook, they actually have a privacy by design option that you can choose and protect your data on Facebook dramatically, but they don't tell anybody about it. So you've got to find it. You got to go into Facebook and search for it. And then once you find it, you can select it and you can have your information strongly protected on Facebook. It exists. It's just not communicated. That's what drives me crazy.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. But what actually happens when you tick that button?
Well, theoretically, when you click that, then you choose to share your information with the 5 people who you want in your family, plus a few friends or whatever. You get to control who gains access to your messages on Facebook. It's huge.
Okay. All right. Just genuinely curious if if it really changes things. That's always been the problem with me with those long, those extremely long. I once cut and pasted a few of them for a few weeks, and they really were the size of small novels. 40, 50,000. It's astonishing what lawyers get up to. Right. Yeah. Peter Hamley is a bit with me, and has the PbD button on Facebook been tested to see what it really does.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll leave that for another day. I'm just going to get one last question here, the time available, really. Actually, Stephen Murgatroyd says Facebook PbD doesn't prevent Facebook taking your data, which is interesting.
True. True.
This is from Peter Hanley again. Does the power of PbD get lost when member states implement the EU directives, such as GDPR, into their own law?
Good question. I don't have a definitive answer for that. I was going to say I don't think so, because if you incorporate the privacy by design feature as they have, and privacy is the default in the GDPR, then you strengthen the existing protections you have in your whatever privacy laws you have in your jurisdiction. But it's a good question, and I'm sorry, I don't have a definitive answer.
Okay, good. And just more on a personal note, you take privacy very seriously, as I think we all do. What's kind of your setup? Are you an Apple person? Are you a Mac user? Are you?
I am an Apple person. I must admit. I'm not suggesting that. I mean, every company has problems, but I think Apple is the strongest protector of privacy in terms of end-to-end encryption, for example. A few years ago in the United States, the Attorney General went to Apple. They had arrested a gentleman who had an iPhone, but they couldn't get into the iPhone. They didn't have the ability to break into it because it has end-to-end encryption. So they went to Apple and they said, look, can you open this up for us? We want to gain access to the information. And Apple said, we can't. It's up to the individual. It's end-to-end encryption. We don't have the code to open it. And the Attorney General said to Apple, but surely you can do this. And they said, of course we could if we wanted to put our efforts into that area, but why would we do that? We offer end-to-end encryption. And beautifully, the Attorney General backed out and Apple won that case. Now, I should tell you, in other cases in the United States, they've gone to an Israeli company that breaks the code. So anything is possible. But the point is, Apple stood firm and said, we cannot break the code. It's end-to-end encryption. There's a reason for it. We're not going to disturb that. So I applaud Apple for that.
Okay. And for my part, I mean, one of the things I think about, going back to my software development roots, is that privacy by design actually comes equally from the heart of the system's architecture. It's another interpretation on it. And I have hopes really for some of these distributed ledgers and things helping. It's because everything's end-to-end. There's so many interfaces, so many commercial relationships, so many technical relationships. We'll never quite solve it, but we should always keep trying. Do you have a particular area or two of technology you'd just like to highlight to our readers? Keep an eye on this or that, our listeners.
I'm very concerned about biometrics, but let me be clear, there are two kinds of biometrics. There's one-to-many, which is the problematic one. I'll explain in a moment. One-to-one. One-to-one is actually very helpful because what it does is, and I have it for global entry, getting into the United States, and if I'm traveling, flying, what it does is it says, basically, when I go to the airport and I present my face live, it compares my face live to a picture of my face that I had sent to them in advance, saying, this is Ann Cavoukian, have it on file. When I get to the airport, you can compare my picture, which I have authorized as me, to the live face. And if there's a one-to-one comparison, great, I'm in, it makes it much faster. One-to-many is the problematic biometric facial recognition technique because it compares my face to thousands of faces of bad people or etc. And that's where all the problems arise. As I mentioned, in the UK, 81% false positives. They also had a study that came out of Detroit in the United States, 96% false positives. I'm not making this up. A lot of people of color in Detroit, and it's especially problematic dealing with people of color, but even 81% is huge. Why would anyone rely on that? That's why I'm so glad a number of states are now outright banning it in the United States, and I'm hoping that grows.
Yeah. We're getting a few thanks in, and Peter Hanley points out that end-to-end encryption also helps a company prevent its product being reverse engineered and things.
Good.
But just a very final one. This is from Marco Campagna. Marco says, on Twitter, you seem very concerned about vaccine passports. Can you expand on your concerns quickly?
I will, but I can tell you this is not a popular position, so I'll start by saying that. I object to governments, to people demanding that you be vaccinated. This is very personal decisions to make, personal health information, and the fact that you have to show a vaccine passport, which basically says you've been vaccinated or you can't get into the place of operation. A lot of workplaces, a lot of universities are now not accepting students who don't have the vaccine passports. They're not accepting citizens. To me, it is appalling that my personal health information should be forced to go in that direction, that people should demand that I get a vaccine. They don't know what they're talking about. A lot of people are immunocompromised. They cannot get vaccines. It's not good for their health. There are a number of other problems associated with it. Surely this should be a personal decision, whether you choose to be vaccinated or not, and you shouldn't have to show that sensitive health information that is otherwise very strongly protected health information. But in this manner, it's all out there. Everybody expects you to have this. I object to that very strongly.
Okay. Well, thank you. That's extremely clear and clearly an area of much discussion ahead as we.
And Michael, can I add one more thing? If I can add one more thing, it's going to lead to so much surveillance, unbelievable surveillance. They're calling it now vaccine surveillance that will be happening globally because everyone is asking for these, demanding these vaccine passports. It's linked to geolocation data, where you were when you presented it, and this will proliferate as a major surveillance tool.
Yeah, my mother drilled into me the old Benjamin Franklin one, those who give up essential liberty for some temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Personally, we all deserve liberty and safety, but we have to realize we need to work for it, and that's important too. And it's been fascinating. And sorry about the little hiccups on getting you in there, but
no problem. No, my fault.
The audience has been very, very engaged. I think this is fantastic stuff, and we hope to hear more. We wish you and your standard every success, hopefully expansion. I just need to give 3 quick rounds of thanks, if I might. Firstly, to our sponsors, as ever. I hope you found this interesting. Thank you, our listeners and viewers out there. We've got quite a bit happening at the moment. And for a very strange thing happening on Wednesday, the 27th, back to work in the city. That should probably be highlighted. That's going to be our first physical event since March last year. So
Wow.
anybody who is in the City of London, we'd encourage you to come to Baker's Hall and join us. All the rest of the things are on the website, as you would expect. But Ann, thank you. It's really kind of you to dial in from
My
Canada.
pleasure.
You've had a great career. I mean, it's a thrilling career, and you keep extending it, all for the benefit of everybody else, which we really do appreciate. Unfortunately, technology, surveillance or otherwise, doesn't allow me to show you everybody applauding. So I'm for them using my Korean karmic clapper.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
We look to have you back perhaps and tell us
It'd be a pleasure.
how things develop. Take care
Okay.
then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.